Thanks for coming out tonight on Monday. I was just held hostage by two twin babies, and I managed to escape. Okay, so we're going to start with Timothy O'Keefe tonight. Timothy O'Keefe is from northeastern New Jersey. His first book, The Goodbye Town, won the 2010 Field Poetry Prize and was published by Oberlin College Press. His poetry and nonfiction have appeared in the American Poetry Review, the Best American Poetry, Boston Review, Colorado Review, Denver Quarterly, our own Seneca Review, the best of all those, Volt, and in many other journals. He is currently an assistant professor at Piedmont College in Georgia. So that's all the technical stuff. I think Tim is going to read a lyric essay tonight. He hasn't shown it to me, but as I was reading his poems this weekend, I noticed a few things I admire in his poetry that I thought just might tell us a little about him as an essayist. One thing that occurred to me is that I secretly, and now very publicly, like to think of his poetry as metaphysical in Eliot's sense that it finds the verbal equivalent for states of mind and feeling, when the distinction between thought and feeling dissolves. In The Goodbye Town, for instance, O'Keefe investigates the phenomenology of time and the quality of the imprints that memories leave when revisiting bygone days, often in the face of trauma or loss, all while refusing nostalgia. In one poem, the speaker's 9-year-old self is on the cusp of having his innocence perverted as the poem inches closer and closer to the sexual image of his father's girlfriend sliding the young boy's hands beneath the sheets. Everything leading up to that point seems to inhabit a strange temporal matrix. Since the mental recreation of a memory dwells in the past but harbors foreknowledge infused by the future perspective from which it is remembered, this poem's present is the past strangely overlapping with its future. So the moments preceding the dark experience are simultaneously free of perversion and packed full of it. When the speaker finds himself in the space, he says, "I'm where the language ends." In his current manuscript, from which tonight's lyric essay comes, a majority of the poems are 4 lines in length and dubbed quadrilaterals. The poems invite us to consider each line as a vector of thought or voice that constitutes the side of a quadrilateral of some kind. For such short poems, they are incredibly complex. Stevens once said, "Poetry must resist the intelligence almost successfully," and these poems do precisely that. We might begin wondering very basically if a particular quadrilateral is recognizable as, say, an isosceles trapezoid or a parallelogram or an altogether irregular shape that can't be categorized beyond its four-sidedness. To satisfy that simple curiosity, we have to examine the ways in which one line can be said to intersect the next, and whether that intersection is acute or obtuse or indeterminate, and more importantly, what those metaphors might tell us about the poem that we would otherwise miss. How, after all, can lines of poetry be read as having a perpendicular relationship? And what does that reveal? But scrutinizing the relationship of one line to the next isn't enough. To see the whole structure, we also have to think of each line's relationship to every other line. How might the first and third lines be read as parallels? How do the second and fourth relate? And since every quadrilateral is, of course, a closed circuit, we would be remiss if we didn't connect the fourth line back to the first line and examine their connection. So it keeps you very busy this week. But all this is still too abstract. The next question has to be, according to which principle or qualities do the lines have the relationships that we've determined? It has nothing to do with meaning, mind you. In one poem, for instance, 2 lines, by virtue of each having a caesura 2/3 of the way through, followed by exactly 4 words, those lines are parallel with respect to form. For other lines, how we characterize their trajectories has more to do with tone, mood, and the kinds of utterances they are. This line here is an aphorism. What begins is a percept, and we are what the percept begins. While this line is pure lyricism. Outside, the mob gathers its silence like a bell. This absurdist, the balloon man draws his balloon face. This one, vintage, chit-chat and highballs, thus the decades, plush as zeppelins. There's the whimsical. Occasionally, in heaven, their eyes drift downward to the thought of heaven. And the, I'll call it tenderly creepy, I love you the way a severed head loves a serving tray. It's a good line. And the cleverly playful, people pass by people passing for themselves, passing people, and so on. It's a chorus of different voices in the next room over. You can't make out the conversations exactly, but you can catch clear scraps. The work to sort through them is both part of your task as a reader and your reward, leaving you better off for having done it. But maybe it does more than just that. Maybe it doesn't leave you better off, but in fact, better. I guess that's the magic of his poetry. It improves you. It is a joy and an honor to introduce you to Timothy.
Wow. I've never read the severed headline out loud, and now Jeff has, so I can say, well, it's been read, and maybe I never have to do it. Thank you, first off, for having me, Hobart and William Smith in the department, and of course my dear friends Catherine and Jeff. It's been a pleasure being here and meeting their babies, and just being back talking about poetry and poetics and all the stuff that I miss, and I'm very glad to return to. And thank you all I realize that the semester's winding down. It's kind of a hard time to go out and see reading. You have all kinds of things to think about. So thank you for coming. I'm going to start with a few of those quadrilaterals, just because in my second book, I think they are kind of interspersed throughout, and then I'll move on to the lyric essay, which I haven't read before, so I'm excited to do that. And honestly, I can't say anything better about the quadrilaterals than Jeff did, so I'm going to not say anything about them, just move forward. This first one is called, can everyone hear me, by the way? Okay. This first one is called Quadrilateral Adult Lullabies. Chit-chat and highballs, thus the decades plush as zeppelins. Rivering peal, rivering whirl, shut-eye river, we swallow that pearl. Occasionally in heaven, their eyes drift downward to the thought of heaven. She lights the mossy walk, steals a tongue from his every tower. Quadrilateral reliction. Our mother in a cantaloupe dress, breezing the sunset through. The piano calibrates the player. One day, the gate syncopates. This wayward agency, gable to gable, in some peaks pass us over. Not events, but atmospheres. Not trains in the night, but whistling. Last one, with the quadrilaterals. The next piece will be much longer. I realize you're the final exams and stuff, but that's a little extreme. Quadrilateral pinch in your heel. Soars the mackled sound, kites ago. A Polish boy thinks with accordions, adopts a stammer. When were we first older than we wanted to be? That was our city, our chisel, the corbel from which we ate. Okay, this next piece, this is the prose piece. I think of it as a hybrid piece. I kind of resist calling it a lyric essay or a story. I mean, it has qualities of those things, and so for me, it's a kind of meditation on language and listening, and what I really believe are kind of incredible internal distances that we cover in just everyday communication with one another. It's called You Are the Phenomenology. Imagine that you're an insatiable reader, and you've acquired, through both osmotic and cultivated encounters with language, not only a prodigious vocabulary, but the desire to prudently focus and channel it towards some contemplative end. Naturally, after a period of intense study or reflection, you want to share your considerations with a range of people who are both similar and dissimilar to you, that you've always envisioned the whole reading, writing enterprise to be, at bottom, a collaborative enterprise, one that fosters a palpable boon in our understanding of what it means to be human. This, but also a great interpretive mire with countless systems of semantic ambiguity, whose very purpose seemed to be, at times, the enforcement of some totalizing ambiguity that brooks no definitive claims, no true resting places. So, this, in light of that, there you are, ready to listen and be listened to. It's an afternoon in mid-October, brisk with a bit of tooth. You entered the cafe through a side door and quickly surveyed the room. You found your way to the back, made your salutations, shed your coat, and settled into the corner booth. Your interlocutor begins. She is a classically trained singer, and she speaks with a singer's reserve, one that knows and fears the strain of full-throatedness. She wears a green scarf patterned with gilt parrots. It is easy and safe to look at, but you can't just stare at her collarbone and expect to set a tone of candor and sensitivity. You must look up at her. You must make eye contact. Essential and intricate, concrete and wildly suggestive, the most exacting of all listening skills. Furthermore, your eye contact must be deployed in discrete intervals, and these intervals need to be tailored to your specific interlocutor, the gravity of the subjects under discussion, the nature of your relationship with said interlocutor, the circumstances of the meeting, the time of day, the temperature, the barometric pressure, the kind of week she seems to be having, the kind of week you seem to be having. And please be apprised that none of these variables are mutually exclusive, of course, which means that none of them can be calculated before the conversation takes the shape of its unique moment, which means you're going to have to be optically nimble and vigilant and precise if you want what you've always thought of as your listening practice to shine through in a way that makes your interlocutor feel completely at ease and unsuspecting of the terrible demands that listening places on you and, frankly, anyone who's mindful of it. So, don't forget to look natural. Sit straight, but don't be stiff. Nod your head, but not continuously. You're not a guidance counselor. Don't cross your arms against your chest. That's expressed as doubt, mistrust. And don't rest your folded hands against your belly. That's smug and creepy and paternal. Best to keep your hands on the table. Palms down, of course. If you've got grit under your fingernails, make soft fists. If not, you can let your fingers stretch out a bit, but loosely and with a curve at the knuckle. Keep them still, but not statuesque, and don't fuss with the sugar packets. Now your interlocutor has finished talking. Her face is slightly flushed, her eyes bluer than before, and her elbows are on the table with one hand supporting the chin. You have been good. You can see it for yourself. She turns to you in a pose of quiet relief and gives a half smile. Her green scarf nearly glows. It is your turn to speak. Imagine now that your interlocutor is an exquisite listener, the one from whom you absorbed, without even trying at first, all the best attributes of your listening practice, and the one from whom, you must admit, you still have much to learn. The silent ball is in her court, and so you must begin. Of course, you can't just say any rote thing that comes to mind in order to observe her listening prowess and further hone your own practice. You have to reciprocate. You want to reciprocate. And in order to do that, you have to give yourself fully to the speaking act, the one that will convince your interlocutor of the comfort and vulnerability that she has engendered in you, the one that will engender in her those intangible listening responses that you have yet to learn. But again, make it natural or else it won't work. Not only will the conversation, not work, but its breakdown will introduce a rupture in the otherwise seamless symbiotic rapport that you've both enjoyed on and off for years. Now, in the intervening moments that feel impossibly dilated, you find that you don't have an appropriate response to or segue from your interlocutor's speech act, which was compelling and honest and emotionally rich, so much so that it now seems to retreat into its own hermetic bastion, a kind of set piece that asks nothing more than to be acknowledged from an admiring distance. And this is no surprise. After all, your interlocutor is also a superlative orator, one who can modulate between public and private discourses, and more importantly, one who understands that in order to do the work of good listening, one must have something of significant scope and clarity to latch onto, that one simply cannot exercise the entire complex of gestures, looks, and body language on the topic of celebrity divorces or unseasonable weather. So, you begin. It's a tentative maundering at first, but your interlocutor is patient. She is aware of her own towering presence and the difficulty of each sea-level beginning. Slowly the scale is laid, the blueprint is drawn, and your words start to amass and careen and conjoin within their centrifugal focus. You are watching her watch you. She blinks almost when you blink. She chuckles spontaneously. You both nod for a refill of coffee, and in this, even your silences agree. The sentences come easily now, fluidly, and you start to experience a kind of insular hearing, whereby your words pass through a filter that is so deft and responsive that it doesn't feel like a filter at all. It feels like some ideal replica of you, thinking and talking outside of itself, but also from deeply within. You can hear what you say before you say it. You can hear your own voice translating itself into itself. It is going well, isn't it? Yes, it is, she says, in a look that holds you for an extra second. Not quite erotic, though it's hard to imagine a half measure, and that's what makes it perfect. Yes, it is going well. I don't know. Okay, this one. But now, just when you've settled into the warmth of her reception, you begin to hear a glitch in the dark machinery of your own speech. And this glitch appears in its outermost mechanism, the fact that you yourself are also an external listener of the things you say. What you've been saying amounts to a question turned diatribe against familial duty, which, once you've heard yourself articulate its outward form, you realize is really just a conceptually souped-up lament against your older brother for snapping on you last July and later refusing to apologize. Granted, the causal chain leading up to that event is rife with subtext and interpretive blind spots that are themselves delicate and involuted, but let's face it, it's all tediously familiar to pretty much anyone who has active sibling relationships into adulthood. Somewhere along the way, your post-filter, not yet external voice has shifted gears or direction, or you're not sure what, but it's no longer refining and pacing your own speech act. No, it now seems to imbue the words with a mild sneer, an ironic twang, barely noticeable at first, but you can feel it accelerating, and you start to panic at the thought that your internal filter, which just a minute ago seemed a humble and apt servant, has somehow remapped its own circuitry and now threatens to undermine not just your interlocutor's nascent belief that things are indeed going very well, as her right hand tucked a lock of hair behind her ear and she dragged her fingertips lightly along her neck, so lightly that you could feel your pinky ghosting its response along the lip of the creamer. But also your own long-standing conviction that language is the great arbiter of the world, and by harnessing it, we can perform our histories, actuate our futures, and finally concede that so much of the rest is not ours to navigate. Language as the one and the many, the first and the last, the very presence we live through, here, but also distantly, like the mirage of water on a summer highway. Is its vanishing the same for everyone, you've often wondered, or is each person subject to a singular distance? No doubt you've met many people, and some of them also work their language like a chisel struck by the mallet of their will. But you also get the feeling that some people, maybe even a lot of people, use their presence to assert not just the unimpeachable sharpness of their chisel's edge, but the apparent rectitude of their character for having merely uttered the words. This is to say, A lot of people stake their language to a site of moral power and then coyly invite you to stop by and make yourself at home as if their insignia were emblazoned on every wall and threshold. You know you've met these people, and you know others have met them too, maybe with even greater aversion. Over the years, you've come to believe that education is, in its broadest sense, the granting of permission to speak your will and to offer presence without the fear of being rendered invisible. Not a corpus of knowledge, not a skill set, and certainly not a license to grandstand or pontificate, but a steady belief in the legitimacy of one's identity. You've come to realize that this is your site of power, the one you've coveted and valorized, the one whose precincts have in return sheltered and galvanized you, and even now, as the internal voice transmutes into its externalizing self, you can feel another stake thrust into the ground, no matter if the ground now feels as though it's turning to sand. This is the sinking feeling you feel. The awareness that some presences may inevitably negate others, that negation is surely the worst aggression one can inflict on another, that every chisel defaces before it creates. Nonetheless, you can't deny that you are proud of your pedigree education, not for the velvet on your doctoral robes or the perks of your alumni credit card, but because it took quite a bit of rerouting and recalibration for any of that to appear among your possible horizons. And the fact that you accomplished this first formative task says more about you than any transcript ever will. You've always enjoyed that thought, and in a few cavalier moments, you've actually spoken it aloud. You're not proud of those moments, but you can't say you wholly regret them either. You can now feel your face taking color. You feel the opposite of invisible, and so you pause, catch the server's attention, and order an iced tea. Moments later, it arrives, having already sweated through the glass. And so, no, not maybe the more you think about it, but probably. Those who wield language from a site of moral power are very probably met by others with greater aversion than you yourself have shown. Or now, as you think harder and closer and come to the real crux of things, you can absolutely bet your ass on it with much greater aversion. And so the likelihood that you are less repulsed by these people than others are, does this make you one of them, regardless of which side you pledge your allegiance? No, you think, that's a bit presumptuous, self-flagellating, there's some logical steps missing there, etc. But might it not mean that you are inclined toward using language in this way, as a kind of lexical producer? Or is this unpleasant solidarity yet more evidence for your savvy as a lexical consumer? That your empathy is capacious enough to include those whom you consider dangerous and manipulative bloviators of public opinion? Maybe. But then again, to even begin to think that your empathy is capacious enough, doesn't that smack of a narcissistic posturing that would preclude any sincere attempt to absorb the world from someone else's less grandiloquent station? Perhaps the obvious conclusion is to cut out the prolix bullshit and just talk about stuff in a way that A, others can readily apprehend, and B, doesn't make you sound like the aloof, self-satisfied intellectual that you are dead set against. To state the big questions in simplest terms, isn't that the goal? And yet, a deep-seated part of you, the same part that urged you toward a liberal arts education and an ecumenical worldview and a masochistic work ethic and the embrace of all things strange and mundane, this part senses that many issues have no denominator that is truly common to all parties involved. This part of you knows that the aforementioned ambiguity of words and the structures they create is often irreducible. And while we may agree that this is axiomatic, the way of the world, not much doing there, etc., we still have the Herculean task of reconciling the innumerable lenses through which people perceive the world around them and inject their presence within it. And so, after much attentive listening, if your interlocutor now says that a rectangle defines some situation that you've always considered octagonal, so to speak, what's the use of debating how it fits into the larger mosaic whole? Can we even assume that such a whole exists when the foundation itself often appears in rubble? If the whole is merely the sum of contiguous experience, if each of us is confined to some half-swept corner of isolated consciousness, where the dogs go on with their doggy life, where the chance that any two thought vectors meet head-on is roughly equivalent to the odds that two randomly chosen cars will arrive at the same remote crossroads at exactly the same day and hour and instance of their lifetime trajectories, then what was the point of all that unquenchable reading? You've now spoken at length. And it is very hard to map an emotional hierarchy in the things you've said. Never mind trace the desultory path between those things. And yet you can't shake the feeling that your internal filter has done right, that this is how things are. That your inability to encapsulate even the minor trials of everyday life says something crucial about the experience of language and what it really means to be present with others. Not to mention what it says about your so-called site of power. Your server brings the bill on a plastic tray. He has drawn a smiley face at the bottom and discreetly covered the total with 2 peppermints. You now feel clear and cleared, and you begin to wonder if there is such a thing as transparency that is pure enough to render one invisible and hypervisible at the same time. A pole star that offers opposite roads out of the wilderness. Both begin on mossy escarpments that descend into forest. Both wend through shade flowers and waving boughs. Both are modeled in the light and dark patches they've passed through when they open at last, as all things must open, on the same native valley. You look up as if through trees and find that your interlocutor is staring right at you, unblinking. You have never seen her in this face. It is taut at the edges, tinged with gray, and there's a vague contortion to it, not discernible in any one feature, but there all the same, a synthetic quality that soaks through her expression as if she were wearing a mask, or as if she were a palimpsest, or as if she had lived and died long ago and been undertaken and very carefully arranged. The mark of that valley is wiped clean off the map. Here your hands regain their clamminess, your undershirt sticks to your back. Out away the intervals that the body subsumes. She does not say, and you cannot think how she would. It seems both too much and not enough. The parrots on her scarf have alighted and will not turn away. Your interlocutor stands up and excuses herself to the restroom, her palms pressing the sides of her skirt. You watch her weave through the tightly arranged tables, and for the first time you notice that the cafe is loud and bustling and indifferent. She knocks on the restroom door, disappears inside, and you are now alone in the throng of dishware and water glasses. You wonder why it must be so. Then you wonder why the thought had never occurred until now, that although you have seen wild animals along the highway in a drought summer, making their cautious approach, bemused and gazing at streaks of fatal cars that race toward latter distances, this distance being itself the promise of more. Perhaps you were wrong when you thought that they had come to cross over. Perhaps they had come to drink. Thank you.
I am going to thank a few people, even though I'm not a reader but an introducer, because I'm the outgoing director of the Trias Writers Residency, and we have people to thank. So thanks to the various entities that have sponsored a wonderful series of creative writers this year, including the Writers Reading Fund, the English Department, the Honors Program, Provost Office, Art and Architecture, and Asian Studies. Thanks to Peter Trias, our patron saint of creative writing on campus. Thanks to superstar English students Danny Shawnee and Kelly Craig for doing amazing honors projects that enabled us to bring tonight's wonderful readers out as honors committee members. Thanks to the bookstore for always supporting our events with book sales. Books make very classy graduation gifts. Thanks. Thanks to Sue Gage, who holds everything together with cleverly placed pins and needles and makes the rest of us involved in these readings look deceptively as if we're organized, as if we know what we're doing. And thanks to all of you for appreciating good writing, for coming out to events like these that enrich your college experience and also your thinking and your living. It is a very real pleasure to introduce to you fiction writer and essayist Rachel Marston. Let's begin with the biographical formalities as required by the genre of the introduction. Rachel Marston's fiction and nonfiction have appeared in Diagram Event, The Collagist, and numerous other journals. She recently received a Central Minnesota Arts Board McKnight Foundation Individual Artist Award. She earned her Ph.D. in Literature and Creative Writing from the University of Utah and is an assistant professor of English at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University in Minnesota. I met Rachel in grad school in that much beloved University of Utah Creative Writing doctoral program where she and I used to run an also much beloved grad student reading series together called The Working Dog. One of my fondest memories of Rachel as a writer came during one of our annual rapid fire readings near Halloween time dubbed the Scary Reading. For this annual rapid fire, some of the best up-and-coming poets and prose writers in the country would write 3 to 5 minute scary short works, specifically for the occasion. Sometimes funny scary, sometimes sexy scary, sometimes creepy scary, sometimes just plain old scary. This year in particular, Rachel wrote a devilishly dark short fiction piece about a professional handholder who gets hired by then Vice President Dick Cheney. To be clear, by professional handholder, I mean someone hired literally to hold a person's hand during the night to make them feel safe. Much of the story takes place, as I recall, in Dick Cheney's bedroom with the protagonist holding Cheney's hand while he and his wife sleep. This was one of the funniest premises for a scary story I had ever heard. And when I laugh a lot, like really laugh, these little muscle thingies on the back sides of my head start to ache. And Rachel really got them going that night. And yet her story also has this bizarre kind of in the margins creepy compassion that reminds me of one of my favorite Neil Young songs, Campaigner, whose chorus goes, "Even Richard Nixon has got soul." It's like Rachel was saying, even Dick Cheney gets afraid of the dark sometimes. Of course, the reason Neil Young chose Richard Nixon as the subject of this song is because he was as far from having soul as anyone could imagine at the time. Likewise, the idea that even Dick Cheney needs someone to hold his hand at night is simultaneously back of Catherine's head achy funny, bizarrely ironic given his Darth Vader-y reputation, and kind of oddly human and darkly compassionate as well, and scary as it turns out. And this is something I love about Rachel's work, the blurred emotional and ethical landscapes, the multiplicity of conflicting feelings one feels, how the scary mixes with the tragic and the ordinary, and the funny and the quotidian, the horrible and the beauty at the edges of the horrible. Rachel Marston is fascinated by things that should repel but are also strangely attractive and indicative of human contradiction. The atom bomb, Las Vegas, Nevada, children sitting on rooftops watching nuclear fallout dust settle down on the desert. She zeroes in on the children and then zooms out to see the whole wide reach of the mushroom cloud. She writes with a kind of versatility that allows her to move from sweeping historical accounts to intensely lyrical moments in single paragraphs or even sentences. Sometimes it feels as if she's channeling an encyclopedia in some kind of bookish seance. I get swept up in it, me and everybody. We get implicated and then we get dealt with generously despite our implication. Rachel's work has a deep compassion for regular people in the sometimes brutal world going through strange difficulties and troubling ambiguities, the way we can edge up against ethical boundaries or even sanity given the right or maybe the wrong context. She finds ways to capture the complexities, beauties, heartaches, quiet moments, yelling moments, and small beautiful redemptions, the saving graces of ordinary lives. It's wonderful to be able to introduce you to Rachel Marston.
Thank you so much to Catherine for such an amazing introduction. I may hire her to be my professional introducer, should I require one. And thank you to Jeff as well, and to everyone at Hobart and William for being such an amazing host for providing this occasion. And in particular for Kelly and Tammy, but Kelly, who's honors thesis of defense, was able to help in the amazing. And another occasion to think about Las Vegas, too. And thank you to Tim for such a beautiful reading. I am going to be reading to you from a short story that is part of my short story collection in progress, and this story is called The Surface of the Sea. The dolphin swims in tight circles in the deep end of the pool. The couple stands side by side, watching its body arc through the water. The chlorine can't be good for it, she says. There's a dolphin in our swimming pool, and that's what you think to say? He looks at his wrist and remembers that he has not yet put on his watch this morning. He stands in his bathrobe and briefs about 10 feet from the back door. She shrugs. Why not? I mean, it's true, isn't it? The sea isn't chlorinated. Well, there's probably some chlorine from spills or naturally occurring, but you know what I mean. She looks again. Dolphins aren't meant to be in swimming pools. Her hair is disheveled, a dark brown mess of curls sticking up in places and flat and stringy in others. He sighs. He sighs a lot these days. I'll see what I can find out, he says, and he turns toward the house. At least it seems happy, she says. She's pulled her robe tight against her body. Happy? He doesn't know where she comes up with these things. How can you tell? All dolphins look happy with those wide mouths. They all look like they're smiling or laughing. I don't know. Why are you giving me such a hard time? She peers into the pool and her robe falls open. She only wears a t-shirt, one of his old ones, that she must have appropriated years ago. He moves toward the door. Aha, she says. She's a woman who says aha increasingly as she marches into her mid-40s. She points her finger, long, skinny, and sharp at the pool. Because it is swimming. Her voice is bright with triumph. She pulls her robe, a slinky thing covered in garish red poppies, around her waist and stands a little taller. Swimming? Yes, swimming. It could just be sulking in a corner or floating at the top of the water. But no, it's swimming. He has turned again to face the pool and his wife and the dolphin. He takes a few steps toward them, but stops as the too-tight rubber strap of his flip-flop digs into the flesh between his big toe and second toe. It is true. The dolphin is swimming. He can't deny this. But isn't swimming simply a state of being for a dolphin? He doesn't know. He suspects that she doesn't know either, but if he asks, she will swear that she does. She'll say that no, swimming isn't a state of being, but a sign of mood. He'll Google it. He pats his legs right below his hips, searching for his phone. He's surprised that he's still in his robe and underwear, and that his phone is in the house, that he has his coffee. He takes a sip and wonders when he'll be able to go inside. Lately, she complains that he doesn't listen when she talks, that he doesn't care about the things she cares about, that she could live each day spending her time learning aerial acrobatics for all he knew, as long as there was food in the fridge. This is actually true. He doesn't care about what she is doing or how she is doing it. He isn't sure when this changed. He used to find her forays into ceramics, belly dancing, colon cleanses, microloans to women weaving bags in Turkmenistan, reading programs for impoverished youth, saving the silver sword on Haleakala, training for a mini triathlon, a half marathon, 3 days of imposed silent meditation at their house. The list went on and on. He used to find these things compelling. Then she became too much. This is how he sees the words in his head, all capital letters spread out across the space of his mind. Too much. And now this, a dolphin in their pool, as if somehow she made it appear. The dolphin arrived sometime during the night, or materialized, or they didn't really know. What they did know was this. Last night, when they went to bed, there was not a dolphin in their swimming pool. And this morning, there it was, a dolphin. He probably wouldn't have noticed it, but she had gone outside to see what the temperature was and returned in a flutter. You need to come outside now. She pulled at his sleeve. He brushed her hand away. Stop picking at me. No, John, now. Her face was flushed, a slow crimson from the middle of her neck that spread across her chin, cheeks, and nose. Really. She spoke rapidly, her breath a little heavy, as if she'd just run around the block. "Can't you just tell me?" he said. "You wouldn't believe me, so you'd better put down your paper and just come out." When he finally yielded, he admitted that she was right, at least to himself. He wouldn't have believed her if she had said, "There's a dolphin in our swimming pool." He might not have even looked out the back door. His resisting annoyed her, and he would have kept resisting until she huffed out a sigh and said something like, "Fine, then I'll call Nancy." Instead, he followed her and was standing there in his robe and flip-flops and his now cold cup of coffee with a dolphin in his pool. The dolphin is gray and sleek and all the other words people associate with dolphins. Joyous, buoyant, fast, agile, free. Except that instead of in an ocean, the dolphin swims in circles in their swimming pool in their backyard at the northwest edge of Las Vegas. "I've read about this," she says. "About what?" She is staring at the dolphin, but with a distant look in her eyes. She looks up at him. How after Katrina, people found dolphins in their swimming pools. How they would wake up one morning in the midst of all that devastation, and there was a dolphin alive and swimming in the pool. "There are no hurricanes in Nevada," he says. I know. She does know this. No hurricanes, not in Las Vegas, sometimes an earthquake, but not hurricanes or tornadoes or tsunamis. She remembers a dream from years ago when two men came into her room and said, "Let's shake the walls." They put their hands up and pushed. The room rocked and swayed, and she covered her head with her blanket. She woke suddenly during the rocking, and the bedroom walls were still shaking. At first she thought she must be sleeping. Then she realized the whole house was shaking. A 5.6 earthquake at Little Skull Mountain. "Do you remember that earthquake?" she says. "What?" He squints his eyes at her. "Never mind." With a wave of her hand, she continues, "The point is, I've never read stories where people walked into their backyards and just found a dolphin, dead or alive, on their lawns. Don't you think that's strange?" He doesn't say anything this time, just shakes his head. She moves her hands up and down as she speaks. That if a storm was strong enough to hurl dolphins from the ocean to swimming pools hundreds of miles away, wouldn't the storm also hurl dolphins into yards without swimming pools? She looks at the dolphin. I mean, in all the arbitrary actions of natural disasters and the destruction of one house but not the one next to it, how is it that the dolphins somehow only end up in yards with pools? Doesn't that seem strange to you? More strange than a dolphin in our very own swimming pool? His lips pull together in a tight line. Maybe, because it must happen that people wake up and find dead dolphins in their yard and no one ever talks about it. Or maybe it never happens and no one talks about that either. He shakes his head, a slow back and forth. "We should call someone," he says. "I guess," she says. "Okay." She wants to keep the dolphin for herself. Not really keep it, but at least for now. An hour or two, no more. He stands in the kitchen, holding the cordless phone in his right hand. She asks him to wait to call animal control. Why? In the late morning, with his robe open and the phone in his hand, he reminds her of a young Marlon Brando to swap the phone for a cocktail and have him yell Stella into the morning. "I don't know," she says. "I'd just like to wait. I mean, how often is it that you wake up and find a dolphin in your backyard?" "Fine then, whatever. I'm going into work." "On a Saturday?" "Yes." He plants a small kiss on her forehead, a gesture of familiarity, of habit, as he leaves the room. It is the gentlest of touches, a slight brush against her face. The shower starts, and she hears the rhythm of the water change. She will wait to go back outside until he leaves. She starts to dial Nancy's phone number, but she decides she doesn't want Nancy there and returns the phone to the counter. She looks outside but can only see the dolphin fin from the kitchen window. When she was young, she played shark in the pool with her friends. One girl was a shark, the other the swimmers. The shark girl began by holding one hand up out of the water as she swam, the fin of the shark, so like the fin of the dolphin, except for the gentle curve. When the shark attacked, you had to leave the pool for at least 5 minutes. The girls never expanded much on the horrors a shark could enact. No talk of blood in the water, of a feeding frenzy. But the very possibility of injury, the menace of the unknown dangers of the world, made their skin rise and their stomachs tighten. One girl always got too afraid and shrieked too loudly when the hands of the shark girl touched her back, as if a preteen girl's hands could really become the serrated teeth of a great white. But still, they kept playing week after week, summer after summer, until they were old enough for the pleasure of fear to be replaced by the pleasure of dating, the thrill of waiting for a call, a touch, a kiss. She remembers that dolphins are said to have rescued swimmers from shark attack in the ocean. That if you see a dolphin in the ocean, it is safe to swim because dolphins mean no sharks. That dolphins can regenerate blubber and fins and other body parts after shark attacks, sending their own stem cells to the wounded areas to be remade into whatever part needed to be fixed. When she was 14, she read Madeline Alingle's A Ring of Endless Light about death and young love set against the backdrop of a summer on an East Coast island where the main character swam with dolphins. She loved that book. The idea that humans, if they were open enough, could have some telepathic relationship with these sea mammals, that dolphins and humans had some deep ancient connection, a wisdom stretching back in time, when love was innocent and a girl dreamed of being kissed, rather than discussing mortgage payments, whose parents to spend Christmas with this year, why they never had children. The shower stops, and she begins wiping down the kitchen counters and tidying. She wonders if she were to throw herself in the pool, fling her arms around the dolphin, if the dolphin would communicate with her, teach her something profound and true about the universe. She stands on the pool deck, her feet bare. The warmth of the pavers rises into her feet. The weather is cooling from the fierce heat of the summer. She shrugs the robe off her shoulders and pulls the t-shirt over her head. She has never stood naked in this backyard. She can barely remember standing naked in any backyard, at least not as an adult. But she remembers summer's nights when she was 11, 12, 13, sleeping over at Andy's. They would slip out of the house when the parents were asleep and quietly into the pool. Sometimes they made up dance routines or played Marco Polo, and sometimes they slipped off their swimsuits, bodies hidden by night and water, because it was a thing that seemed both forbidden and adult. The wind moves across her skin, and she stands a little taller. The dolphin still swims in slow circles. She is determined to walk right in, no hesitation, but she pauses at the edge. Then she steps down the first stair, and the water just covers her ankles. The dolphin is almost directly opposite her at the deep end, its gray skin blending with the shadow cast by the pool's edge. She steps again, the water lapping against her calves. Her nipples and skin rise with the second step. The water, though warm, is cooler than the air. The dolphin lingers in the deep end. When she looks at it, she sees only its fin and its dark shape, and she cannot help but think of a shark. A fin, an oblong shape, a creature not human. Suddenly she cannot move. She wants the dolphin to raise its head from the water to reassure her that it means no harm, that she doesn't need to be afraid, but the dolphin is just fin and shadow. It begins to move toward her. The water ripples as it swims, and then it is almost at her feet. She jumps toward the pool deck, hits her shin, and falls. She pulls her knees to her chest. Blood wells in 3 places on her palms. She looks at the water just as the dolphin raises its head, then slips again beneath the water. It is evening now, and the backyard is awash with light, not the fading light of the winter sun, but the light of the 3 phone crews from the local news station. The woman, the nightly news anchor, speaks in those carefully enunciated tones calibrated to a gently soothing smoothness. We come to you tonight from the backyard of the Summerlin home, where a couple awoke this morning to a dolphin in their backyard swimming pool. Pan camera to the pool where the dolphin is seen swimming. Local authorities still have no explanation for this strange occurrence, but have contacted the Mirage's dolphin habitat to ask for advice and assistance in the dolphin's removal and continued care. The Mirage is not missing any of its dolphins, but has offered to host the dolphin at its facility until the dolphin's origins are determined. John stands to the side, his hair carefully combed, shirt pressed in case he is required to be on camera. She sits on a pool chair, a gin and tonic in hand. She knows the dolphin's origins, from the Greek delphus, related to delphus, the word for womb, fish with womb, also related to the oracular Delphi, and dauphin, French for prince. She read on Wikipedia, the Delphinus delphus, having a longer and more slender snout than the porpoise, with which it is frequently confounded. She does not confound the dolphin with the porpoise. She knows the dolphin's snout extends into a beak, which the porpoise is lacking. A beaky snout which the dolphin will ram into the soft underbelly of the shark to defend itself or an injured member of its pod. It will ram the snout into the shark repeatedly, hard snout into soft underbelly, until the shark is stunned or unconscious or dead. The crew from the Mirage has arrived and they are bringing some sort of sling over to the pool. She doesn't know how they'll transport the dolphin once the dolphin is pulled from their pool into the cool, open night air. Perhaps a truck filled with water, perhaps a truck with no water, but where the attendants will bathe the dolphin from water bottles as they speed down Summerlin Parkway to I-15 to the Spring Mountain exit, where they will rush the dolphin from truck to trolley to dolphin tank and say, "Here, dolphin, here is your new temporary home." John has had his turn on camera. They asked her to, but she said no. John walks over to her and puts his hand on her shoulder. "It's time," he says. "Did you know," she says, "that the dolphin was also known as the mare swine or pig of the sea?" He squints his eyes again, pulls his lips up tight under his nose. The woman and the man in their khaki pants and Mirage shirts have asked her to move away from the pool. She stands and the dolphin pauses in its circles. It lifts its head a little out of the water. Its eyes are dark. She cannot see if it has pupils or if its eyes are simply solid dark orbs. She thinks it is the latter. The dolphin looks at her and she looks at it. The dolphin handlers lower the sling into the water. One of them dangles a fish. She watches the dolphin, its slick, rubbery skin as it slides underwater, gliding just over the sling, reaching for the fish. The dolphin has told her no secrets, has revealed nothing to her. Then the dolphin is in the sling, and the crew is hoisting it from the water. The dolphin doesn't move, surrounded by the blue fabric, held up by wide metal tubes on the shoulders of the dolphin habitat crew. The crew begins to carry the dolphin from the backyard. She steps over to them, reaches out, and this time touches the dolphin's head. She realizes that the dolphin isn't smiling, was never smiling, just like John said, that the long, thin line, curving up and then quickly down again at the ends, what humans read as a smile, is just the shape of its mouth. Thank you.
In your piece about speaking, it was sort of interesting you said you become a listener of your own speech, and I was wondering if you ever feel like you feel that tension with writing. Do you ever feel like you're a reader of your own writing and find that kind of fun? I guess both of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do, and you can see how this becomes like a quickly layered process where you're writing, and then you're delivering the writing, and yet of course while I'm speaking, I'm now listening to, like right now, I'm hearing you, but I'm also reading the story, so it becomes this like very quickly layered process where it can be hard to sort of navigate and figure out what, I don't want to say who's saying what because it makes it sound sort of oddly mystical or something, but I mean, like almost where it's coming from, and whether or not you're at any one moment you're entirely just listening, or also sort of creating a listening moment for yourself. So yeah, I do think about that. I think it's very much a part of it. Okay, I'm trying to explore that.
I'm wondering, Timothy, between the Broken Sonnets in the Goodbye Town and your quadrilaterals, it seems like you have a relationship with form where you innovate from previously existing ones, or you are consistent within boundaries that you make for yourself. I was wondering how you construct those forms, and you can speak to what they do for your poetry, for your lyric, and how important they are in the process.
That's a good question. My MFA program I went to was I was a bit of a sort of black sheep within it because it was a highly formal program, and I remember thinking that if I could just get through it and not just kind of break down and just like, I'm not doing this anymore, I would be able to kind of use that teaching and some of those tools to my own advantage. But I think sometimes the formal constructs, they allow me a way of creating possibilities that I might not have created just with, say, a 3-verse poem where I'm in some way paying attention to other parts of the poem other than the ones that have now been kind of given over to me. But there's an essay I like teaching called The Rejection of Closure by the poet Linda Jane, and she talks quite a bit about form as being a thing that doesn't restrict imaginative possibilities, but actually provides a locus and a way of finding new possibilities that you might not have found just when you're in the process of inventing your own form. So I do like forms, although I wouldn't call myself a formal poet, because I think there are some forms that can be restrictive when they're followed too closely. So it does factor quite a bit into my writing. I also think that frankly any poem has, like, you can't write, there's no such thing as a formless poem. As soon as you start, or probably anything, as soon as you start putting it down, and you're attuned to the kind of momentum it takes, you're now following in some ways formal considerations as much as content.
Yeah, I guess both of your pieces have something to do with like communication, and how human communication especially is natural, but also, and it's natural and instinctual, but also like artificial and super scripted. And I was wondering, for your story, is like the dolphin, I guess, I'm wondering as like a symbol, I guess, is the dolphin meant to like make that clear for the protagonist of your story, like make this sort of confusing question of how to communicate more effectively with people, and sort of communicating human to human versus like this interesting like
Human mammalian?
yeah. Is it meant to confuse that and obfuscate it, or is it meant to like, does it bring pleasure at all, anything to it?
I think for me actually it is both, which perhaps feels like an unfair answer. I will elaborate, but I think that in a way, especially in particular for that character, but in much of my work, in a variety of ways, and in some ways I actually feel like this is in some ways a more traditional story than much of the other work I write in terms of linear construction. But that this question of communication and those gaps, but also this deep longing to somehow communicate in various levels of recognitions. I mean, much in the way that Tim very nicely illuminated and ruminated upon in his essay, the various ways in which we're called upon to both perform that, and also at the sort of most mundane levels of our lives, but in ways too that are supposed to be the most significant and meaningful as well. And so that the dolphin becomes both a site of relocating this desire and articulating in some some respects the impossibility to do so both with a dolphin and perhaps also with other humans as well. But that makes it sound so grim. So, because I do believe that the continued attempt at communication is essential, right? Or at least that longing for it. I hope that answers. Anything to pick up on?
No, I mean, I was thinking that how the ending of your story is sort of like that smile, that's just the mouth. And then we sort of read it as well, like, oh, look, I mean, it has very much to do with that whole, interpretation of communication and how we're both stuck in it and also.
Well, you were writing about it, and I say that the ways in which you look and must interpret, but not make too much eye contact, and then be natural. Like, I did naturalness, like the naturalness of communication.
I was wondering, like, this idea of having a dolphin being that point of, like, communication or even an ability to communicate. I mean, it obviously fits very perfectly in your story, but I can't help but feel that other animals could have fit as well. Like, how did you come across the idea that, a dolphin was going to be both a symbol of something to communicate to, and then also when she actually tries to enter the pool, something that's actually terrifying, and you realize, oh, this might actually not be as serendipitous as it first appeared.
So to respond to the first question, I, much like the character in my story, had a great fondness for the book A Ring of Endless Light when I was growing up, and I was married, and I really had these romantic fantasies of, like, I went to SeaWorld once with my family, and I thought, I stand by this, like, weird shallow, and as I think about it as an adult, incredibly uncomfortable, sized dolphin pool, like it's like a dolphin petting pool. I don't know if they have this thing anymore, I hope they do. And the dolphin skin was all very but I thought, somehow if I stand here and my desire to, the intensity of my desire to communicate, something will manifest in it. I was not thinking about this in those terms when I was 12. So that has stuck with me, and so I just somehow thought whatever random thought popped in my head of, oh, there's like a dolphin, and there's people swimming in the pool, and then the Madeline Lingo reference appeared. And I think as often happens with a story, and I think with many kinds of writing, that you have an idea, but you also have to let go of that idea in the writing itself, so that it doesn't become and let things emerge, and then let readers surprise you with awesome observations about things that have happened in your own work. And not to say that you're not mindful of them, but I think it's similar to that the more you start constructing stories or poems and thinking about formal consideration, you have all these tools that are available to you, but not necessarily always consciously sometimes as well. I mean, you're not making conscious choices, but that one of my mentors always talked about the most important thing when you're writing fiction is to ask, well, what word comes next? So that you're not trying to force the story somewhere. And so I feel like for me, I wasn't certain in the time of writing it where this was going to go, because I have been writing for a reasonable time. I knew it probably wasn't going to end somewhere happily. Spoiler about writing fiction. But I think that there's also an ambiguity, or the idea too for me that just because the dolphin isn't smiling means that it's grim, right? I think it's also this recognition of the ways in which we try to impose certain kinds of meaning in the world.
Also, the fact that she's this sort of inexplicable presence, then she has to enter into this obviously foreign environment, because the fear of being in water where you can't really do anything, and so there's a few layers of why it's I don't know. I think if we're just like a bear. They'd be like, well, yeah. It wouldn't have the same sort of, and the bear mouth. You'd lose that. Yeah.
Got a question about you are the phenomenology. I'm pretty sure the last thing I read in second person was a choose your own adventure book around ancient
maybe me too.
Yeah. But throughout the essay, you use you, and I kind of found myself relating to things I've never even experienced because most of the statements start with the pronoun you. Can you talk about manipulating me like that?
Actually, I kind of want you to talk about it.
Did you know you could do that?
Well, I mean, I think, second person for a while was a very perspective that's used because it can feel manipulative and kind of like it runs this risk of people saying, well, no, I wouldn't do that, or I wouldn't think. But I think in the context of communication, to me, when I first started that essay and was exploring that perspective, I started thinking about how you is not, of course, just the reader, but it's this, that sort of self-dialogue. So as you're scrutinizing, as you're trying to find yourself and assimilate into a certain situation, you're also aware of your own attempt to assimilate. And so now you've already created a you of your own self, and now it's addressable, and so that aspect of it, especially in terms of communication, I thought it opened up some options for me writing it, and of course there's probably no getting around the fact that when you write you, anyone who reads it is kind of, does what you did, and so, so I think just because the communication context, I think that's what opened it up a bit for me. So yeah, I don't know if that explained you to you.
That's up to me. It's a perfect title.
Anything else?
I've got a question.
Oh,
I get one for each of you. It's not like I can't ask one question totally. So just one thought for you, which is that, so if your stories as all stories sort of end up happening, the moment at which they do turn to become unhappy is not, in other words, it could have happened later in the story. So I was having really D.H. Lawrence feelings about the story as she walks into the water, and of course it could have got unhappy much further into the water. So I was interested in terms of the notion of one's always really the next corner only. When you knew or why you made the unhappiness occur when she was on the ankle deep, so to speak.
That is a really excellent question. Right, and that the recognition with the dolphin and its mouth doesn't happen in that moment, but after she is safely dry, was having a pool with a cocktail and too. But no, I think for me there was something. Now I feel like I'm going to have to go back somewhere and map out the structure of my story visually, which is something I like to do. But to think about how that movement in there, but I do think there was something very important for me about having the threat of potential violence and the fear of that more so than her. I mean, I guess that could have happened while she was in the water, but I feel like how it spoke to the character's own, while her sort of deep-rooted desire to understand this creature and what she felt like in a variety of ways, but that she could only go 2 steps into her pool. I feel like this is not doing a very good job at answering that question. But there was something, I think, in a way about proportion, too, to her emotional experience in relationship to that somehow going deeper felt like something that could have been interesting and even some other kind of interaction and greater fear, but I also wanted to avoid that because perhaps it also felt more predictable, too.
And I was thinking when you were reading the essay, I was thinking of Nicholson Baker. Because I was thinking that anatomization of extreme hyper self-consciousness and actually the gorgeous permutations of sliding into all those changes, which he does in Rocks and Benedict and others. So I was wondering, who sort of who lies behind the story in terms of saying, go ahead, do that. I mean, it could have just happened because you're just, I can see really having a self-conscious guy, but literary tradition is
Wait, where do you see it?
I'm actually not terribly familiar with his work. But if you had said, well, clearly you read and love David Foster Wallace, that's all over the page, I would be like, oh, wow, I should, go back. So he's one that, his writing I'm often taken with, not just, I love this combination of, there's pretty much everything's been said, I think, but the way in which he can be incredibly elevated and kind of hot-blooded at the same time is something that I've always admired. And I think, frankly, I've always been a bit over-conscious and hypersensitive to conversation dynamics. And I don't know why that started. It wasn't like my parents never listened to me. I don't know. But I find myself, and so there was just a wanting to think through that and, perhaps imagine some of those spaces more clearly so that I could selfishly, maybe not even make it, just make it worse. I might have but that's the other side. All right, thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.